All right. So in today's Qualified at the Intersection, you're going to get video, which is me. It's Memorial Day, so it's a holiday, so we're a little more casual here. And it's going to be some musings about Memorial Day, George Floyd's murder, and the resulting efforts of change, and just a couple things. So first of all, Memorial Day. You're going to hear this a lot today, hopefully, but I'm going to add to it in case you only hear it here. So one of the things that we forget is that history is not a straight line. It twists and it turns and it doubles back. And I'm going to read a little section from my book about that in a minute. But we lose origin stories of things, especially when African Americans are at the center of it. And so Memorial Day and its origins go back to Charleston, South Carolina, in, I believe it was 1865 in Charleston, South Carolina. So at the end of the Civil War, there were Union soldiers held at a racetrack. And after the war, many of them who had died or were killed or whatever had happened to them were thrown like garbage in a mass grave. The now formerly enslaved folks in South Carolina, African American folks, and some white missionaries, they decided to unearth the dead bodies, clean them, prepare them, and put them in a proper grave and adorn the graves with flowers. It was written about in the New York Times as the greatest procession South Carolina had ever seen. They sang songs, they went around the track, and they honored the dead with gratitude. That is the origin story of Memorial Day. And I think sometimes people feel like, well, Black people are always trying to say they did this and they did that because it is hidden. You know, the question is, why isn't that simply part of what we learn? Why isn't that part of American history? You know, I've advocated that Black parents and parents of Native American children and Hispanic Latinx children, they should sue in states like Florida and Texas on the grounds that their children are not, in fact, learning true, accurate American history, and it is designed to elevate one white race, the white race, and make other races feel like they have not contributed or they are inferior in the American story. I mean, that's what I think should happen. But the fact that Memorial Day has this grounding to it, that the formerly enslaved felt so strongly about those who had given their lives during the Civil War that they unearthed these folks who had been thrown away like garbage, organized their bodies, prepared them better for burial, honored their sacrifice. That is the origin story. And we have been written out of so much of the origin story that it can feel weird to people. Like we're always claiming things. Well, we're claiming things because these things have been hidden, you know? So I think personally about the Civil War, my great-great-grandfather received a pension from the Civil War, but it's not for the reason you think. He was forced into service with his master on the Confederate side. So he did receive a pension because his master's daughter fought for him to receive a pension after the Civil War. Now you would say, well, why would he not run away? Why would he stay? Well, we know that he was either married or going to be married. His wife was on the plantation. It was not that simple. At those times, you were forced into service, really. And so our role in this story, I know my own family's role in this story, goes back to its origin story. And yet we are routinely dismissed. We are treated like less than American citizens by people whose families have way less time in this story, but the color of their skin grants them more validation and more rights in the story. So yeah, Memorial Day, I always think about these people unearthing these bodies that were odorous and mangled, and they didn't care. They wanted to honor the sacrifices of the dead. Now that is honor. And they sang songs about the flag and about a country that had uniformly rejected them and would still yet have to certify them as American citizens. If that is not patriotism, if that is not love of a country, I don't really know what is, so, and this highlights a problem we have with American history and with everything that goes on around us. And I want to read this from my book, Qualified: How Competency Checking and Race Collide at Work, before I transition to the conversation about George Floyd. It says, there is a misperception about where we are on the racial progress timeline. Part of the problem is that we think the racial progress timeline is linear, going only ever in one direction, toward justice. The fact that we continue to hold this misapprehension that there is a straight line from chattel slavery to the first Black president is undermining our efforts to confront and deal with what is actually happening. Now, that comes from several social scientists who are cited in the book. The truth is that racial progress is a winding or circuitous route that doubles back constantly and is never guaranteed. This is the thing, I'm hearing all these think pieces about the anniversary, if you will call it, of George Floyd's murder, and how we haven't really gotten anywhere and we've only made incremental. This is because you are under the misapprehension that there is some kind of straight line. And this is a problem, that we do not see history as it starts to arc and double back. We can't stop it in time. We did not have to be where we are today, but you could not convince people that history was about to double back. Not many people really didn't want to hear that. And whether or not Joe Biden was mentally fit, Joe Biden should not have run for a second term. But I'm going to tell you something. Joe Biden was right that democracy was on the line. Now, many are liberal and progressive. Oh, it was economics and you got to help working class white people and then they'll vote. No, they won't. People voted in what they thought was their best interest, which was to save whiteness. And as President Trump recently said, a white genocide, literally and figuratively. And people of color who voted under the false assumption that they were going to get white adjacency in the bargain. None of that turned out to be true. Financially, people are worse off than they were for when Joe Biden was president. So, the murder of George Floyd was never going to give us a straight line to liberation. We have been at this several hundred years now. And the problem is every time we get to an inflection point, be it freedom from enslavement, be it Reconstruction, be it civil rights movement, we think we've reached the pinnacle and it's all addressed. We constantly skirt the fundamental issues, specifically around anti-Black bias. We have such a hard time facing the realities of that and its impact on everyone, because anti-Black bias does not just impact Black people. Just like whiteness doesn't just harm Black people, it also harms white people. We are caught in this perpetual struggle because George Floyd's murder and diversity, equity, inclusion cannot bear the weight of 400 years of our lack of understanding that we have been caught in a circular pattern. And the only way to get rid or get out of this pattern is to interrupt its action in a foundational, fundamental way. And that is the conversation we did start post George Floyd's death, which is to even publicly say the words white supremacy and say the words anti-Black bias. We hadn't even gotten that far. So the fact that people are disappointed, or I guess part of me wonders, what did people think was going to happen? George Floyd's death was somehow going to erase 400 years of oppression? Diversity, equity, inclusion, which isn't even legally mandated, was somehow going to erase 400 years of oppression? We can't even remember that Memorial Day was started by the newly freed, formerly enslaved. We can't even remember that. So how in the world were DEI and George Floyd's death going to upend every system in this country? And if it didn't, nothing worked. It was worthless. That is absolutely not true. But what it is true is we can never break this cycle, until we understand the ways in which history doubles back and we begin to actually interrupt it, that we stop it. And we do have to face foundationally the impact, the toll that anti-Black bias has taken on all of us, every one of us, whatever our color. And that we don't address that by marginalizing Black folks. We address that by going full tilt at dismantling these systems that have perpetuated unfairness. And we do that through restoration and reparations. And these are things we do not like to talk about in this country, but we just keep doubling back. And because we are under the misapprehension that history is a straight line, that justice is a straight line, the arc of the moral universe is long. It bends, but I'm going to tell you, in that bending, it turns, it's circuitous, it triples back, comes back around. We have to keep trying to straighten that arc out to head toward justice. So on this Memorial Day, I ask you to remember a few things. Remember the formerly enslaved who did the delicate, heroic work of honoring the war dead in South Carolina, who are the reason we honor those who died in service, is African Americans, and they are part of this story, so much of our story. I ask you not to look at George Floyd's death in vain or diversity, equity, inclusion, total failure, but think about our collective failure to understand the way history doubles and triples back and to step in the gap to interrupt it. These are things we need to figure out, and we need to figure out how we begin to move the system in ways that do straighten the line toward justice, and how we address the fact that anti-Black bias is a root cause of so many of all of our problems. And how do we eradicate anti-Black bias, and how do we move away from a white supremacist mindset toward a new future? And this we cannot do if we believe that every milestone is the hilltop that we have reached. Remember, Moses went up into speak to God, but the Israelites still had another 40 plus years in the wilderness. And so I just want us to think in memory, and think about history, and also think about how we chart a road forward. So those are my musings on this Memorial Day, and I hope you had a good, relaxing 3-day weekend, and that's what I got for you.